What began as an ordinary morning at The View quickly turned into one of the most intense on-air confrontations daytime TV had ever seen, at least in this fictional account. The studio hummed with the usual pre-show energy, lights being tested, hosts getting touched up, the audience buzzing at the thought of seeing Tom Cruise in person. He arrived with his usual movie star presence, sharp suit, electric smile, a coiled spring energy that seemed to animate the whole room. Everyone greeted him warmly. Everyone except Jane Fonda. She sat back, watching him with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Those who knew her would have recognized the look. Not hostility exactly, but something preparing itself for a fight. The interview began smoothly. Tom spoke with passion about his new film, his training, the idea of playing a man who stands for unshakable principles. And just as he finished describing his character's commitment to doing what's right, Jane leaned in and struck. "Isn't it interesting," she said, slicing through Whoopi's next question, "to talk so much about integrity while being part of an organization many people consider questionable?" The entire room froze. Tom's smile flickered, but only for a second. Whoopi tried to save the moment, redirect the conversation back to the movie. But Jane pushed forward, voice growing sharper, more self-righteous. That's when Tom laughed. A real laugh. Not defensive, not nervous, almost amused. "Jane, this might be the most hypocritical thing I've heard in a very long time." Jane blinked, thrown off script. She'd expected denial, anger. Not this. And Tom didn't hesitate. "You want to question transparency? Patriotism? Let's talk about Vietnam." The studio inhaled as one. Tom laid out point by point how Jane had once traveled to North Vietnam during wartime, how American families had watched those infamous photos with shock and grief, how her actions had hurt real people whose loved ones were fighting and dying. Jane tried to respond, but her voice shook. "That was a different time," she managed. "A different time?" Tom echoed. "Those were real families, real soldiers, real consequences." Whoopi attempted again to shift gears. Too late. Jane lashed out, calling Tom's faith cult-like, accusing him of being controlled, manipulated. That was the moment everything changed. Tom's entire demeanor hardened. The charming movie star vanished. His voice dropped to a calm, dangerous whisper.
"Let me tell you something about courage," he said. "Real courage isn't flying to enemy territory for a photo op that lands you on the front page. Real courage is taking responsibility for the people you hurt." He dismantled her point by point, not yelling, not losing control, but with surgical precision. He accused her of spending decades polishing her image instead of honestly reckoning with the consequences of her choices. He pointed out that her apologies had always been framed around her regret, not the actual pain she caused others. Jane's confidence crumbled. Her hands trembled. The fire that had blazed in her eyes minutes earlier was gone. She tried again. "At least I've grown. I've evolved." Tom leaned in. "Evolution isn't rebranding. It's ownership, without excuses." He pressed her with the question she couldn't answer. Had she ever, even once, truly considered the POWs and families affected by her actions as real people, not just obstacles to her reputation? Jane looked shattered. The room was silent. Finally, Whoopi stepped in to close the segment, her voice strained. But as Tom stood to leave, he turned to the camera with one final statement, calm, unwavering. "People can question my choices all they want, but I can sleep at night knowing I've never betrayed my country, and I've never spent decades rewriting my own history." He walked off set. Jane sat motionless, tears gathering, unable to lift her eyes to the audience. The show cut to commercial. And in this fictional telling, the internet would spend weeks debating the moment, whether Tom went too far or whether he simply said aloud what millions had long believed. What is certain is this: a routine interview became a brutal, unforgettable confrontation between two very different definitions of integrity, and only one person walked away unshaken.
The studio descended into a strange, suspended silence the moment the red off-air light blinked on. Crew members who had spent years navigating celebrity meltdowns, political clashes, and live TV disasters suddenly found themselves frozen, unsure whether to rush in or keep a respectful distance from the battlefield that had just been created on stage. Jane Fonda wiped beneath her eyes, trying to catch the tears before they fully formed. Her hands trembled, not wildly, just enough to betray that the confrontation had cracked something deeper than she'd expected. Whoopi Goldberg stepped toward her first, gently, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Jane," she said quietly, "you okay?" "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice had none of its usual steel. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise had already disappeared backstage, walking with the same determined, military-like stride he often used in his films. His handler tried to speak to him, to offer reassurance, to ask if he needed a moment. But Tom simply raised a hand, polite, firm, final. The network's executive producer, Maya Delgado, a woman famous for her ability to smile through chaos, hurried down from the control booth. She knew this wasn't just a run-of-the-mill on-air clash. This was a potential ratings explosion and a PR nightmare. "Jane," Maya said softly, crouching beside the actress, "do you want to step to the green room? We can hold the next segment." "No." Jane straightened her spine, wiping her cheeks decisively. The words were brave, but her eyes still held the aftershock. On the other side of the set, Tom's voice, calm, clear, could be heard as he spoke with a young crew member who had followed him, unsure whether he needed escorts or security. "I'm fine," Tom said. "Really, I meant what I said. But this doesn't need to become a circus." The crew member nodded, though it already was a circus. People on set were whispering, replaying what had just happened in their minds, comparing notes, trying to make sense of whether the actor had crossed the line or simply said what no one dared to say. When the show resumed, the atmosphere was different. The audience clapped, but with a confused hesitation, the way people applaud after an accident simply because they don't know what else to do. Jane returned to her seat. Her makeup artist had done a miraculous job. She looked composed, elegant, unbroken. But the camera, cruel in its honesty, picked up the faint redness around her eyes. Tom's chair was empty. Whoopi, always the master of diffusing disaster, turned the moment into a joke. "Well, that was definitely the most cardio I've had before noon." Laughter rippled through the studio, nervous and relieved. Then she added, more quietly, "We're all friends here." It was the lie morning television is built on. The rest of the show moved mechanically. The next guests, two nervous authors promoting a book about pet wellness, sat stiffly as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The host kept glancing at the empty chair where Tom had sat as though it might explode. When the episode finally wrapped, the second the cameras cut off, Jane excused herself with a polite nod and walked briskly toward her dressing room. This time, no one tried to stop her. Behind the scenes, though, Tom Cruise hadn't left yet. He stood near the loading bay, talking quietly with the show's producers. His jaw was still tight, but the fire had cooled. He wasn't angry anymore, he was resolute. "Look, I don't regret what I said, but I don't want a media war. No headlines twisting this into something ugly. You know how these things get." Maya nodded. "We'll handle it." Tom glanced toward the studio hallway where Jane had disappeared minutes earlier. He finally said, "I hope she's okay. I really do." But he didn't go to her. He turned, thanked the crew, and exited into the bright New York afternoon, slipping into the black SUV waiting at the curb. As the door closed behind him and the vehicle pulled away, onlookers recorded videos, unaware that they just missed the tail end of a moment that would dominate the internet before sunset. Inside the building, Jane sat alone in her dressing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't broken, but she was older, more tired, more aware of the weight of her past. She whispered something to herself, not an apology, not a justification, something closer to a confession. Why did he hit so hard? And then softer, why did it hurt so much? Outside in the hallway, a stagehand paused, hearing the words, but kept walking. Some moments weren't meant for witnesses.